The people of Uzbekistan of all Central Asia have much on their minds these days. Dramatic and profound changes in the government and in the economy, complex relations with the major world powers, and the painful economic and social impact of the COVID-19 epidemic. These are only a few of the challenges that Uzbekistan faces today. Now, while fully acknowledging the urgent importance of these and of other issues of the day, I would propose that the preservation of the country's cultural heritage is not only on the same level of importance as these great challenges, but that it will, in the long run, actually determine how effective Uzbekistan will be in confronting change in every sphere of the national and international life. In short, the success or failure of Uzbek citizens in preserving their cultural heritage will profoundly affect their effectiveness in facing all the other challenges before them. Now, I know what you're thinking. Of course he says this. He's a historian after all, and that's what historians are bound to say. Maybe so, but please hear me out. We live in a world in which all societies are changing. Few are changing faster than Uzbekistan. The question we must ask is, what are the resources that each country can bring to bear as it undergoes transformation? A benign climate, rich natural resources, a healthy and vigorous population, men and women with modern skills. These are only a few of the many obvious qualities that enable some countries to succeed at modernization. Those societies that lack any of these assets are at a big disadvantage. Now, high on the list of prerequisites should be a deep historical past that includes skills, knowledge, and achievements that can be beneficially applied in the present. In short, a rich cultural heritage is the key. Why is this important? Well, all developing countries face two choices. They can either strive to adopt techniques, methods, and skills that have been worked up by others, or they can progress instead by adapting those same features of modernity to their own culture and way of doing things. By merely adopting the best practices from abroad, a country can advance quickly, but at the price of becoming just another cog in what the French sociologist Lévi-Strauss called the global monoculture. But by adapting rather than adopting, a country mobilizes its deepest technical, artistic, scientific, and spiritual qualities, thus assuring that the old enriches the new. By so doing, a country not only enhances its chances of success in the modern world, but it assures that it remains in harmony with itself. The fact is that countries that evolve through evolutionary processes that embrace their cultural heritage are stronger, more harmonious, and more successful, and even happier than those which shed their past, tossing it aside like a piece of worn-out clothing. This is why Uzbekistan's cultural heritage is so terribly important today. It is what will enable the country to succeed and at the same time remain true to itself. It is not merely an adornment of life, but its very essence. Carefully preserved, the cultural heritage will live in every man, woman, family, and community and enable them better to face the endless challenges that modernity presents. It will assure that the future Uzbekistan will not be simply a copy of other societies, but a distinctive place in which past informs the future, and culture informs technology. It is for this reason, and not simply because I happen to be a historian, that I am here stressing the need for Uzbekistan's cultural heritage to be a full and contributing partner of new knowledge, new technologies, and the new economy. So, with this in mind, let us conduct a brief inventory of Uzbekistan's cultural heritage. A heritage, of course, which is as much regional as it is national, and which extends across all political and ethnic borders. Every visitor to Uzbekistan is quick to perceive its distinctive heritage in architecture. The great monuments of Bukhara, Samarkand, Khiva, and other centers speak eloquently of a glorious past. Many such monuments have been preserved, although several so-called restorations, in quotation marks, did damage to the original structures and ripped them from their natural context of surrounding buildings. It is worth redoing some of those Soviet-era restorations in light of our modern knowledge of the buildings. The absence of building stone in many parts of Uzbekistan forced ancient builders to use mud brick. Countless vast structures built from this material have simply dissolved over time. Archaeologists have excavated some of these lost monuments and discovered that they were, in fact, treasures of world architecture. They are Uzbekistan's dissolved Parthenons. We can dream of rebuilding Timur's grand palace in Shahrazad, but the cost of doing so would be enormous. Why not then reconstruct these monuments virtually so that future tourists and students can experience them as living realities? Such a project could greatly enrich tourism at ancient sites and also, of course, enrich museums. They would enable, these virtual reconstructions, would enable future generations of students to recapture a lost past. No less important, it would enable Uzbekistan to rewrite the history of world architecture by adding great examples of the building art that have long since vanished from this land. Great architecture, of course, is not confined to the grand monuments. Indeed, no aspect of the historic architecture of Uzbekistan holds more potential interest to the modern world than the homes and walled compounds to be found in the ancient quarters of Bukhara, Samarkand, and other historic cities. These dwellings, the product of cultural synthesis between Persianate and Turkic residents in medieval times, present remarkable modern and comfortable models of domesticity, how to live. At a time when many fine old domestic compounds in Bukhara are being converted to hotels, there is an urgent need to restore and preserve them, interiors as well as exteriors, not just as individual dwellings, but as whole neighborhoods, in other words, as entire mahallas. How can this irreplaceable treasure be saved and passed on to future generations? The challenge is formidable, for city governments in Tashkent and elsewhere have little or no interest in historic preservation. Instead of protecting and preserving whole neighborhoods, they focus at best on a handful of what they call monuments of architecture, destroying everything else. Uzbekistan is in desperate need of laws that will protect whole historic neighborhoods and of a citizen-based historic preservation movement that will insist that such laws actually be implemented. Europe and America offer wonderful models of such laws and of citizen-based groups of preservationists, and these should be studied and adapted to Uzbek realities. Preserved and studied, Uzbekistan's historic architecture, the great monuments and equally the mahallas and private dwellings, can provide inspiration for a new generation of Uzbek architects. This task has barely begun, but it holds immense promise for the future. It is the key to preventing Uzbek cities from becoming Central Asian versions of Dubai, bland and generic outposts of global modernism, rather than updated, noble, and inspiring restatements of rich local traditions in the building art. A second treasury of Uzbekistan's culture is the written word. The Abu Rayhan al-Biruni Center for Ancient Manuscripts in Tashkent, now housed in the grand new home, it possesses thousands of rare documents, which are replete with the finest calligraphy, paintings, and drawings. Unfortunately, tens of thousands of other such written treasures have been lost over the centuries. Suffice it to say that it's barely a tenth of the writings of the great astronomer, mathematician, and anthropologist Biruni exist today. This makes Mr. Abduhalikov's effort to identify and photograph rare manuscripts from Uzbekistan that are preserved in the museums of the world. It makes that effort all the more important. At its first 3 meetings, this Congress has warmly endorsed this noble initiative, which experts worldwide already hail as a model for other countries to emulate. Now, books only truly exist when they're being read. This requires for them to be careful, ancient manuscripts to be carefully transcribed, edited, and translated into languages that are accessible to modern readers. This difficult work can produce amazing results. Consider the poetry attributed to Omar Khayyam, who in the 11th century studied and worked in both Bukhara and Samarkand. In hundreds of modern translations, his Rubaiyat is today the single most widely read work of poetry in any language. Incidentally, I said the Rubaiyat attributed to Omar Khayyam because modern scholars have shown that countless early poets used his honored name as a cover for their own quatrains, which became then part of the Rubaiyat. Now, beginning in the 1950s, scholars in Uzbekistan began the immense task of issuing modern editions of the works of Biruni, Avicenna, and Ibn Sina, and other writers from the territory of Uzbekistan. But this work has barely begun. The huge challenge facing us today is to render these works also in English, so that they will be read throughout the West, in India, and everywhere that English is accepted as the main world language. Far more evanescent than poetry is music. Once again, the territory of Uzbekistan produced whole systems of music and the finely constructed instruments to play them. Unfortunately, Soviet rule both simplified and Europeanized this ancient heritage, resulting in a distorted and false product. How can we reach back to the music of earlier times before the introduction of 20th century distortions? Our direct contact with ancient music from this land dates only to a handful of recordings made early in the 20th century. However, multi-skilled Uzbek scholars are now discovering the keys to deciphering ancient musical texts and have begun the task of mastering the intricacies of performance. Soon we will have living masters of this important aspect of Central Asian culture. Similar distortions occurred in dance, resulting in a weird blend of traditional dance and Soviet ballet. Here too, the corruption of time is carefully being peeled away, with stunning results in living dance. Another dimension, still another dimension of Uzbekistan's cultural heritage is its rich contribution to technology. Many ancient scientific instruments, including the famous astrolabe, which enabled Columbus, by the way, to reach America, were developed in part on the territory of Uzbekistan. One can readily imagine a whole museum devoted to these treasures, a museum in which visitors could actually use modern reproductions of these ancient instruments for the purpose for which they were originally intended. Now, Uzbekistan's heritage of technology also exists at the domestic level. Long the world's biggest exporter of finished cotton and silk, these ancient arts are now being revived in their pure form by entrepreneurs in the Fergana Valley. Equally important is the paper for which Samarkand was famed throughout the world. The knives and blades, so-called Damascus steel, by the way, is actually developed in Central Asia, and also the elegant pottery, both in metal and in earthenware. I am pleased to report that all these arts are being resuscitated, mainly by a young generation of skilled visionaries who fully grasp the creative links that can be created between past and future. Now this then is a telegraphic overview of the rich cultural heritage that exists on the territory of modern Uzbekistan. I could have added many other things. For example, languages, dialects, folk poetry, family histories, individual histories. These are all part of the story, of course, but time is limited. True, much was lost during Soviet times, but much remains. If only there are people to study it all, master its diverse techniques, and restate them in modern terms. The process of rediscovery, reinvention, and adoption holds immense potential for the rising generation of young Uzbeks. To the extent they choose to engage in it, they will shape modernity, giving it a distinct and valuable Uzbek caste that can serve as a distinctive model for development throughout Central Asia and beyond. Only by such a process can Uzbekistan save itself from becoming just another bland version of what already exists in both East and West. Uzbekistan deserves more than this and has the intellectual resources and skills necessary to create it. We cannot know the future, but we can shape it. The key to success is to reclaim the country's cultural heritage in all its dimensions and to bring it to bear on current thinking in every field. Uzbekistan cannot and should not do this alone. Foreign experts in many fields have already contributed to the process and could do much more in the future. Collaborations between Uzbek and international experts in each sphere of cultural preservation will unleash untold energies and yield results far greater than either could produce on its own. This is, of course, the kind of thinking that gave rise to the remarkable band of Uzbek citizens and international experts who are assembled here today in Tashkent. In closing, let me join all of you in praying that we succeed together in the noble task of creating a new and specifically Uzbekistani version of modernity that looks forward while embracing the past and which plumbs the past in order to forge and celebrate a distinctive future. Thank you very much.